Welcome to the 18th episode of Bible Summaries. Today we start on the book of 2 Samuel narrates the reign of King David. Focusing on his successes and failures, below is a summary of the key events and messages in 2 Samuel chapters 1 to 24. Chapter 1. David learns of Saul and Jonathan's deaths from an Amalekite, who claims to have killed Saul. David mourns deeply and has the Amalekite executed for killing the Lord's anointed. Chapter 2. David is anointed king over Judah and Hebron, while Ishbosheth, Saul's son, becomes king of Israel under Abner's guidance. A conflict arises between David's forces and those of Ishbosheth. Chapter 3. Abner defects to David's side after a quarrel with Ishbosheth, but is murdered by Joab in revenge for killing his brother. David mourns Abner's death and distances himself from the murder. Chapter 4. Ishbosheth is assassinated by 2 of his men who expect a reward from David. Instead, David condemns the murder and has them executed, clearing the way for his rule over all Israel. Chapter 5. David becomes king over all Israel, captures Jerusalem, and makes it his capital. He defeats the Philistines and establishes a strong kingdom. Chapter 6. David brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Celebrating joyfully, however, Uzzah is struck dead for touching the Ark, leading to a mixture of fear and reverence for God. Chapter 7. God makes a covenant with David, promising to establish his dynasty forever. David responds with a prayer of humility and gratitude. Chapter 8. David secures Israel's borders by defeating neighboring enemies, establishing his role and expanding the kingdom. Chapter 9. David shows kindness to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, by restoring Saul's lands to him and allowing him to eat at the king's table. Chapter 10. David defeats the Ammonites and Arameans after they humiliate his envoys, further solidifying his military power. Chapter 11. David commits adultery with Bathsheba and arranges the death of her husband, Uriah. To cover up the sin, Bathsheba becomes David's wife, and she gives birth to a son. Chapter 12. David repents, but Nathan prophesies that his family will face turmoil. The child born to Bathsheba dies, but later she gives birth to Solomon. Chapter 13. David's son Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar, leading to his murder by her brother Absalom. Absalom flees and remains in exile. Chapter 14. Joab arranges for Absalom's return to Jerusalem, but he remains estranged from David for 2 more years. Chapter 15. Absalom begins to win the hearts of the people and eventually declares himself king, forcing David to flee Jerusalem. Chapter 16. Absalom publicly disgraces David by taking his concubines. David endures curses from Shimei as he flees. Chapter 17. Absalom follows the counsel of Hushai, who is secretly loyal to David, giving David time to regroup. Chapter 18. Absalom is killed by Joab despite David's orders to spare him. David mourns deeply for his son. Chapter 19. David is brought back to Jerusalem as king, though tensions and divisions persist within Israel. Chapter 20. A rebellion led by Sheba is quickly crushed by Joab, who beheads Sheba to restore order. Chapter 21. A famine prompts David to atone for Saul's mistreatment of the Gibeonites. Battles against the Philistines continue, highlighting David's ongoing military leadership. Chapter 22. David sings a song of praise, reflecting on God's faithfulness and deliverance throughout his life. Chapter 23. David's last words affirm God's covenant with him. The chapter also lists David's mighty warriors and their heroic deeds. Chapter 24. David orders a census, which angers God and leads to a plague. David repents and builds an altar on the threshing floor of Araunah, where the plague is stopped. Key message. It emphasizes the themes of repentance, divine justice, and God's enduring promise to establish David's lineage, ultimately pointing to the coming of the Messiah.